So our project was on educating and aiding young women. The women we wanted to focus on finding a way to educate and aid were the women who were affected negatively and victimized as a result of the pandemic. As schools were being shut down around the world as a result of the increase in COVID-19 rates, more children, especially girls, became victims of child abuse, child labor, and teenage pregnancies. Statistics show that these were a result of the pandemic, as there was an immediate rise in the number of teenage pregnancies recorded in Uganda when the schools were initially closed. These continued to occur the longer schools were shut down. A total of 354,000 teenage pregnancies were registered in 2021 as a result of the first national school closure. 295,000 teenage pregnancies were recorded in 2021, the second year of schools being shut down. And this implies that an average of 32,000 teenage pregnancies were recorded annually.
Sexism and sexist cultural narrative beliefs. Essentially, it's a narrative embedded in children's minds culturally from a young age that women are subordinate to men and should always act and think that way from their childhood to their adult life.
We thought that we could help these young women by doing a fundraiser, so we decided on a car wash. But unfortunately, we weren't able to do that due to time.
We reached out to an NGO called Uganda for Her and conducted an interview where they told us that their mission was to empower girls in Uganda to stay in school by providing them with sex ed and health rights. Their goal is for Uganda where girls are educated, empowered, and equal. And so far, between 2015 and 2019, 4,500 Ugandan girls have received sexual health and reproductive rights education, and 2,700 sanitary pads have been distributed.
So challenges faced by young mothers. One of the challenges that young mothers face is finding a job, or even if they find a job, they work for very low salaries. To avoid this, everyone must be educated so that they can develop their skills to have the right skill to apply a high-paying job. Regardless of a profession, getting the right education and improving their skills will contribute them in many areas. As a school, we believe that when young mothers complete their education, they can easily overcome other difficulties they face. In our lessons, we will frequently include the importance and necessary of education and situations that may occur if education is not received. And we will motivate our students in our schools. Young mothers often feel that they do not have enough support, which makes them feel lonely and left out. In order to prevent this, we will support our students in many areas at our school. For example, there will be a psychologist in our school and she will listen to each of our students and try to support them. At the same time, there will be an officer in our school for the career and future plans of our students. The future plans to ensure 100% participation. We will rent a few school buses and enable students to reach for school free and free.
Possible solutions to prevent teenage pregnancy. There are a number of ways to prevent teenage pregnancy, such as increasing the amount of sexual education given to the population, setting a minimum age of consent to 18, offering counseling and consolation towards teens, providing information on birth control, helping teens understand the consequences of teenage pregnancies, offering peer counseling towards teenagers, a better social support system, and offering more financial support.
Thank you.
How is culture affected by colonization and war? By Harsha, Alize, and Suchi. For our Global Perspectives project, we researched the question, how is culture and identity affected by war and colonization? We chose this topic after realizing that most of our lives have been affected by war and colonization around the world. We have covered the following topics in today's presentation: food, migration and diversity, loss of tradition and languages, lifestyle, innovation in science, and development.
Some keywords we covered were colonization, diversity, and migration.
Other keywords are culture, globalization, and tradition.
Secondary research.
Food around the world has changed over the years through colonization. Examples of this are in India when British food was brought to India. Another example was the colonization of North America when European food was brought to America. And through war, Coca-Cola became globally known. Migration and diversity. War caused many families to move and flee to other countries that weren't as badly affected or weren't as dangerous as those. Migration can cause one's cultural identity to change, and this could have different perspectives and allow different cultures and identities. Migration and diversity. War caused people of different backgrounds either fighting or running away to settle down somewhere new. War increased globalization as different nations were trading. Globalization is one of the main reasons that cultural diversity has occurred to the length it has today.
Loss of tradition and language. Languages are being lost at a fast pace. The loss of language is linked to the loss of tradition. As language is a way to communicate and be part of the community, certain ways to do rituals or certain sayings and languages can lead to the loss of tradition if the language is lost. Around the 1970s, children were taught to fit into the larger identity of the country rather than their own unique culture, especially in countries such as Canada, Australia, and United States. Children were led to believe that being part of an identity would mean jobs and easier futures, and while this might be true, they lost their culture and identity slowly. Only around 1990, the importance of knowing your culture and identity became important.
Lifestyle. So the West introduced the English system of education in India. It brought India into contact with Western science, literature, philosophy, history, and many more. War leads to discriminations of certain identities and cultures. This is because most of the time, there is usually some countries and identities perceived as the people that did damage or started the war. Though after World War II, the rate of school enrollments and people who completed their education dropped in some parts of the world.
Innovation in science. Numerous inventions have been made because of the war. They both have positive and negative effects. For example, the atomic bomb. The radioactive segment has helped cure cancer, and it's been a big factor in the medical industry today. Another way is the cellulose coattails, which has been helped to make a further invention of sanitary pads, which was made in World War I. Another invention is the railroad, which was made in the Civil War, and another is the guillotine, which was made in the French Revolutionary War, as well as the metric system.
Development. War and colonization had both positive and negative impacts on development. For example, the British influenced other countries in terms of constitutional development. It helped develop the idea of human equality, human rights, and liberty. A negative impact of war on development is destruction of infrastructure, and this can affect education and healthcare system. A positive impact of colonialism on development is that a large political unit is created which helped most African countries such as Nigeria to develop quicker. Because of colonization, there are better health and education systems. Primary research.
So we interviewed a teacher called Mr. Sam. This is our interview. Questionnaire. How is your life affected by colonization and war? For example, the British coming to colonize Kenya. What happened during that time? Response. Of course, the colonization is beyond my age, but I may not have direct impact on that, but definitely in terms of resources. It has been, let's say, the development of the country because people still feel that colonization has an effect up to date, and what's happening to our economy, and it can be looked at both positive and a negative side. The positive thing is that they brought ideology, for example, education, new civilization to our country, especially in Kenya. Also government structures, because before colonization, we were using traditional or what we call African ways of ruling ourselves in terms of constitutions and kingdoms.
When talking to some people, we agreed the language they speak was affected by colonialism. For example, Johan speaks French. It is likely that Johan speaks French because Belgians colonized the DRC. Some people feel discriminated against. For example, a German person that I talked to said that people assume their identity is starting the war and they follow the generalized image. Another response was by a Jack saying that Christianity was brought to South Sudan and baptism was forced on South Sudan. Another response by Ruth said colonization affected culture in Uganda because it was a narrative embedded in everyone's mind that English was superior compared to our own languages. Some positive effects may be that it helps us be more intertwined with the world in terms of trade and international affairs. These are our citations, and the summary of our project is we talked about the main topics that we thought, but there were many more, such as entertainment. And while doing this, we also realized that some people are not affected by war and colonization.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Effects and Flavors by Aiden, Ajad, Shona, and Shiva.
Introduction. Ultimately, our group believes that there are multiple factors that can have an effect on a country's employment rate. Employment is defined when an employer gives an individual or more a job, whereas they complete a task at good standards, they will get paid. These factors include crime rates / war, education, and population. In this presentation, we will be exploring case studies for each factor in order to come to a conclusion for how they affect employment. We hope to find a link between all of them. So this is currently the rate of employment globally. It's 6.5%. So approximately 200 million people are employed according to the link here. So factors: education systems, population, and crime rate. So basically, in this presentation, we are doing education systems and crime rate, and in the essay, we are doing the population and economic status. Next one. Factor 1. Education systems. How does education affect employment? Ultimately, education can have a huge effect on employment, negatively or positively. The reason for this is because if a nation is more educated, it's likely they'll be more prosperous economically, and then people within a country will have an easier time finding jobs. For example, in many countries such as Canada, employment rates are very high, and they're one of the most educated countries in the world. Lower educational system significantly reduces employment rates for various reasons. This is because it's implied that people with high level in education have more knowledge and understanding for the job. It is also proven that individuals with higher levels of education get better office jobs. Though this is not accurate and affects some individuals negatively. Because jobs nowadays need critical and fast thinkers. For example, poorly educated countries such as Chad have lower education levels and low employment. So case study. So first we're going to be looking at the education system of America. Basically the education system of America uses levels and degrees, and basically the recognition of the degree. For example, on the next slide it shows a table comparing how higher levels of education, such as master's, doctoral degrees, have an effect on unemployment rate within these sectors. Next slide, please. So here it can be seen, for example, people with less than high school diploma tend to have higher rates of unemployment, and as the prestige and recognition of the degree goes up, the lower the unemployment rate goes up. Next slide. So this is education point 2. For the evidence I'll be using to back up this point, I'll also be using literacy rates into comparing them with unemployment rates. Because usually if a country is good at reading and writing, it can be seen as high levels of education. Next one. So we tried to find the literacy rate and compare it with the unemployment rate. However, we found very many links. But such as Uganda has a relatively medium literacy rate and the lowest unemployment rate here, but that might be because we don't have the resources to count all the people without the jobs. And also, many of these countries do calculate unemployment differently, so that's why countries, for example, the United States, could have higher employment, could have higher unemployment than Uganda. But one thing that we found is that the country with the lowest literacy rate had the highest unemployment rate. Next slide.
Our second factor were crime rates. So in this graph, it shows the unemployment rate from 1999 to 2020. And as we can see, Somalia throughout the years has had a relatively high unemployment rate. But we can see that it has a spike from 2008 to 2009. And the reason because of this is Somalia has faced many wars, and the one that they're currently facing is the civil war that is ongoing. So this affects the employment rate, which is currently 13.1%. And yeah, when a country is in war, people will have to evacuate from cities and their homes. Therefore, they'll be leaving their work behind, and they'll have to go find a new place to work from, which will be very hard. But then it could also create new jobs for people like medical workers and transport, because they have to take care of the people in the country. So yeah.
So in our conclusion, we want our project to inform people about the factors that affect employment and of our country. And at the end of our project, we want this information to be used for good to reduce the unemployment rate and increase the employment rate. This could create occupational opportunities for individuals, and yeah. So these are our sources here. Yeah. Thank you.
We chose culture and identity with education because we wanted to understand and differentiate and how they're affected with each other and how they connect and link with each other. So yeah.
Okay, so our focus was mainly on acquiring, we found out that education is on acquiring knowledge and people skills, like how we interact with other people, while culture is a group of people who have the same kind of aim and decisions that they want to follow. And then identity is an individual. It's different from a culture where everyone has the same kind of mindset, while identity is your difference, what makes you different from other people. And we also focus on how these things caused identity crisis, which is when you are in contrast with your culture and identity. Culture and identity, we found out that they're very similar because basically they both focus on a person's kind of uniqueness. Like a culture is unique in its own way because it's different from all the other cultures, while identity also makes it different because it's what makes up the culture.
Identity and education. We also found out that identity is also very much affected by the way we learn, because it's like our education affects our identity by teaching us different types of beliefs and all that. Identity crisis. Identity crisis is when our culture and education are in a fight between each other because of the differences between them.
Okay, so we also decided to focus on boys and girls because they're different genders and people tend to give each of them different type of qualities that they should have. For example, we found out that they both approach education in different ways. While boys are known to be more confident when they're speaking to teachers or are more confident in telling out their ideas, while girls tend to be more reversed and tend to keep quiet and need to be approached more carefully. Yeah.
So we added some people who were influenced by them, and we wrote down their quotes like education is education. We should learn everything and then choose which path to follow. Education is neither Eastern nor Western, it is human. So it doesn't really matter. So as long as we get education, it's a good thing. And then we also chose, if one man can destroy everything, why can't one girl change it? It shows us that perspectives of how they see a girl or man.
We also had a quotes from Warren Farrell. Like, when we suggest that men are at the top because men discriminate, we miss the point. Men are at the top of work hierarchy because work has been primarily men's responsibility. People tend to focus on girls' point of views, thinking girls are the more in need, and they forget that the men are the ones who like created most of the stuff that we do today. How cultures affect the education and lives of students. So some cultures believe women shouldn't study, and this is something, it was mostly known back in time, because people felt that women were should be at home, helping out with the kids while the men were out studying and getting educated so they can work and make the money for the family. But and this causes conflicts between education, because education teaches you that everyone deserves the same type of advantages and disadvantages. So yeah.
So we tried to figure out some solutions for the disputes that they have, and some were that the education that they learn and the culture we focus on could maybe coexist in a way that they don't clash with each other. We also tried to figure out, we also had solutions such as if culture couldn't adapt to the education, maybe the education could adapt to the culture instead, and something like that.
In ways we thought that we could fix these conflicts was let's say find out what type of education that they have and the laws for it, and the types of feuds that are caused between the culture and education, so we can understand as to why they are conflicting with each other. And that was our presentation.